Welcome to Insider Tips on getting your advertising to work. So let's talk about the best way to approach your advertising so that it actually makes you a profit rather than just costing you money. When it comes to advertising, a lot of businesses tend to make very similar mistakes. The principal mistake that most of them make is to start out by selecting the media where they'd like to advertise. By focusing on where you'd like to advertise as your first decision, you actually reduce the effectiveness of the whole campaign. So where do you start? When it comes to marketing and advertising, there is in fact a process that everyone can adopt to make sure that their advertising is working effectively. And the starting point is the product or the service that you want to sell. When they start making advertising decisions, so many people don't consider what they're actually going to sell. They've got a vague idea of what they're going to sell, but they don't always think it through properly. For example, you might want to sell a tin of paint. You got a good price for it, so you advertise the tin of paint. That seems quite reasonable, but the reality is that you're not considering the other bits that you can sell at the same time in the same ad. By just selling someone a tin of paint, you've overlooked the potential for upsells. In other words, you've missed the opportunity to solve the problem that comes with buying that tin of paint. You might be offering a tin of paint at a great discount, but are you offering brushes to go with it? Are you offering cleaning solutions for all of the brushes? What about drop cloths, masking tape or undercoat? Look, the list goes on. There's always something that you can use to upsell on any particular product. So to start with, you need to have a very clear picture of what the product is that you're trying to sell and any of the surrounding items that you can sell with it. You also need to consider why you're selling the product. Are you selling it because you've got a good price or because you're overstocked on that particular product? You have to fully understand the reason why you're actually making that product a component of the sale, rather than just picking products at random. It might sound ridiculous, but people do pick products randomly out when it comes to sales. They usually make that type of mistake when they've selected the media as their first decision. Someone might have offered them a great media deal, so they feel like they've got to take advantage of that deal because it's so cheap. And they start inventing scenarios in which they can sell a product, and that's where they let themselves down. You're actually better off to have a strategy in place that you use to maximize your marketing. A lot of businesses don't have a marketing strategy, and that's one of the things you must have. You should have a marketing plan for your business every year. To a large extent, you'll be able to duplicate it year after year. You only replace things in your marketing plan when you have tested and measured them and found that they haven't been working. We'll come to testing and measuring later on. So let's assume you've got your product sorted out. You know what it is that you want to sell, and you know why you want to sell it. It hasn't just been some sort of random decision that you've made. So the next decision is, who do you sell your product to? Who is the customer? Do you actually know who the customer is? Right now, I'd like you to think of who your customer is. Now think about it for a second. Now, let me ask you. I'm going to test out my psychic powers here. Who thought the word everybody? A lot of people would have. Most people assume that everybody is their customer. It seems quite reasonable. You've got a product to sell, they've got a need to fulfill, so quite clearly, they should need your product. Everybody should be able to buy your product, so everybody is your customer. Yeah, not actually the truth. Let's think our way through this. If everybody is your customer, then let's have a look at this person, or perhaps this person, or this person. Now, all of these people actually live in your area. How many of you actually recognise them? Are they your customer? It's a bit hard to tell by looking at them. They might be your customer, but then again, they might not. You can't actually tell just by looking at them. You need to have a very clear picture of who it is you're trying to sell your product to, because customers and products are matched together. You're trying to sell that particular product to a particular person. Let me give you an example of how everybody isn't your customer. This is a real world example too. Let's consider people who are buying houses or refinancing property. Now, Tasmania has a population of 507,626 people. Pretty impressive off the top of the head. Now, 132,609 of them are under 18 years of age, and people under 18 years of age pretty much don't buy houses. That leaves 375,017 people. However, of that number, 111,220 people are over 60, and for the most part, they're also not in the market when it comes to buying property. So that leaves 263,797 people. Now I realise at the moment the property market is a bit flat, but I can tell you, when we were doing this analysis, at the very top of the market, 4,000 home loans were being written in Tasmania per month. 4,000 per month. So what that really means is that approximately 259,797 people weren't potential customers. That's ruled them out to start with. Now, at the same time, there were 189 banks and brokers and other places you could go to get a home loan to buy a property. On average, that's about 21 loans per outlet per month. Now, at the same time, the best broker wrote on average 100 loans per month. So for that business, only 100 people were actually real clients. So 2.25% of the number of people who could actually buy a property were customers of that particular brokerage. Or as a percentage of the overall market, 0.019% of the population were potential customers. So not 507,000 people. Really, for that business, it was 100 people. So any marketing and advertising they were doing was only designed to reach 100 people. And I've got to tell you, beyond that 100 people, they really couldn't cope. They couldn't actually physically write any more loans without the quality of their service dropping away. And if their customer service dropped away, well, people would have then gone out and told negative stories about their buying experience with them, and therefore wouldn't have become raving fans of the business, and might have only said that their experience was okay. And that's not what you want. So everybody is not your customer. It'd be nice if they were, but unfortunately, everybody cannot be your customer. And you've got to take that on the chin. You can only work towards attracting people who can become your customer. So you look at the 507,626 people and then ask yourself, at any one time, how many of those people are likely to want to buy my product? It's probably not going to be an enormous number. Think about how many people actually buy something from you on an average week. It's probably going to be measured in the hundreds. Maybe you've got a thriving business or multiple outlets and it's measured in the thousands, but it's certainly not going to be measured in the hundreds of thousands. So you need to start getting a very clear picture of who your customer is. If your marketing targets people who aren't interested in what you're selling, then you're both wasting time and money. You need to communicate with people who matter the most to your business and communicate with them better than your competitors. So, let's ask ourselves again, who is our customer? Who will give you the biggest purchase? Who will buy from you more frequently? What sex are they? What age are they? What are they doing at breakfast time? Are they getting their kids ready for school? If that's the case, then perhaps they're not really watching television or listening to the radio. So, should you be advertising at that particular time? Do they read a newspaper? If they do, how often do they read it? Which bits of the newspaper do they read? It's unlikely that they read it cover to cover. What are their favourite television programs? On the weekend, do they go out? Do they do stuff with their children? For example, do their kids play sport? Now you're starting to create a profile of your existing and potential customers. You need to develop a summary of their characteristics, their attitudes, their buying behaviour. Now, I'll happily email you a customer profile questionnaire that you can fill out to get a clear picture of who your customers are. And it's not just for you. Because if you've got staff, they also need to know who your customer is. They might think that anyone who walks through the door is a customer, but some customers are more important than others because they have a greater potential to buy your product. First of all, look at demographics. How would you describe your customer in terms of age group, gender, household size? These are things you need to consider. What about their income? How much do they actually earn? It's probably better to look at household income when it comes to that sort of thing. What's their occupation? Their education? Were they born here in Tasmania? Or are they immigrants from overseas? There are actually websites that you can go to that'll allow you to find out more about demographic profiles, such as the Australian Bureau of Statistics website, and about people in the market in general, so that you can see how much your potential customer deviates from the average person in the particular market. That's very important as well. Something else that you need to consider is geography. Where's your customer actually located? Do most of your customers come from within a 3-kilometre radius of where your shop is? Are you able to draw people from further away, from other suburbs? Will they travel to come to your business? Or is it something else that's close by and convenient that's drawing them to your business? It's very important to know whether they're coming to you out of convenience or whether they're coming to you because of the quality of your product and service. Psychographics is something else worth considering. Psychographics is how you describe your customer in terms of their key social interests. Do they play golf? Do they do family activities? Do they go to the theatre? Their general personality comes into play. Are they conservative? Are they outgoing or extroverted? Maybe introverted, that sort of thing. Where do they hang out? Where do they network or socialise? Also very important. Is it online or offline? Do they go to the pub to socialise, or are they avid Facebook users? This is very important to know. Is their group of friends more likely to entertain at home rather than going out to a restaurant? If they do go out to a restaurant, what sort of restaurant do they go to? Are they looking for silver service or a local family eatery? Are they consuming lots of takeaway food? If they are consuming lots of takeaway food, you need to factor that in because a lot of their disposable income will be going to places like the Golden Arches. What about attitudes? The attitude of your customer towards your product or service is very important because it'll give you an indication of their involvement with your brand or your business. It's important to know how consumers think about your business. As I said before, if it's convenience driving them to your business, then that's going to have to be a major part in how you market your business. What about buying behaviours? This is also worth considering. Buying behaviours relates to how your customers behave when deciding to buy your product or service versus that of your competitor. To give you an idea about buying cycles, a buying cycle is how long it takes for them to become aware that they actually need to do something about your product to the time they actually part with the money. We're going to talk about a well-known Scottish takeaway restaurant. We'll call it McDonald's. The McDonald's buying cycle is 10 seconds. From the time that someone goes, I'm hungry, what do I feel like? I think I'll go to Macca's. And they're done. The decision's made. And a lot of McDonald's marketing is designed around that, to try and drive people into making that decision. It's become a bit of a ubiquitous decision. It's so easy to remember McDonald's. They're at the top of mind and they get a lot of business that way. Coca-Cola, for example, maintain that any child under the age of 7 that they can get to drink their product twice will be a client for life. That's a pretty big call. Imagine if you were Pepsi and you were trying to overcome that problem. So when it comes to buying behaviour, motive and influences may vary by customer group, but will always include rational and emotional reasons as to why they're buying your product. Rational reasons include things like location, convenience, customer service, image, the range that you offer, promotional offers, that sort of thing. Emotional reasons include such things as, will it make me feel good? I've got confidence in what they do, or I buy their product and it gives me the feeling of importance. So you can see that the more you know about your potential customers, the easier it is to communicate the right message to them at the right time. Once you've established your customer profile, you would use it in every piece of marketing that you create. Everything from email newsletters to business cards. Business cards are marketing too. You need to make sure when you give someone your business card that your marketing is doing its job. For example, if you need to remind customers about their appointments, then that should be on the back of your business card. From a marketing point of view, that's the way it would work. If you're a hairdressing salon, the appointment card is very important, so that would go on the back of the business card. When it comes to all marketing though, this is something you really need to consider. Marketing is about holding up a mirror to your customer. If you hold up a mirror to someone and they look into it and see themselves, from a marketing point of view, they are your customer. They're seeing a reflection of themselves in your message, and therefore you're communicating with them. However, if they look into the mirror and they don't see anyone, they're not your customer. And that's why it's important to have this profile, because what you're trying to do is reduce the number of people who look into the mirror and don't see themselves. The more times that your marketing impacts on someone who actually is your customer, the more effective it is. The message. How do we formulate what the message is going to be when we are advertising? There are certain things that you need to consider, and it doesn't matter whether it's radio, television, newspaper, or a direct mail piece. All advertising needs a headline. If you're talking about electronic media like television or radio, it's referred to as the hook. It's the thing that hooks them into the ad and makes them continue to interact with the ad. The headline does the same thing. If their eye doesn't read the headline, then you've missed out on that opportunity, and potentially that person is not a client for you. You need to realise that when you open a newspaper or direct mail piece, if it's too cluttered or busy, your eye hits it and effectively bounces off like a ball. It doesn't take the information in. It says to your brain, it's too complicated, haven't got time, and just moves on. And therefore, that's been advertising money wasted. And a lot of businesses try to do this. They try to put too much into their ads. And by doing this, they're trying to get their ad to do more than it's capable of. And as a result, it doesn't end up doing anything. It also happens in radio and television ads. I'm sure we've all heard or seen a television ad where the voiceover has been running really, really quickly and there's lots of images flashing on and off the screen. It's like being assaulted. You just can't take all the information in. There's so much info that your brain can cope with. And at any one time, if it reaches an overload point, it effectively switches off and you don't absorb the information. If the information hasn't been absorbed, then the ad hasn't done its job. So let's talk about effective advertising headlines or hooks. Statistically speaking, only 17 out of every 100 listeners or readers are able to absorb the headline and then continue to take in the rest of the message. So that's less than 20%, 17%. It's not a huge amount. However, this is great because, as we discussed previously, it's not 100% of people who are interested in your product. If 17% of people were interested in your product, that is still a very high number to be achieving. Remember that what you're trying to do is make sure that of the potential targets of your ad, you're maximising your reach. So if there are only 100 people interested in your product, that you would try to reach 100 of those people. This is done through making sure that your ad is both worded and laid out correctly, and that your media buying is right, so that you're being exposed to the right people in the right places at the right times. We'll talk more on media buying stuff later on. When it comes to headlines, you need to do what is acronymically called AIM, A-I-M. Aim, intent, move. Now the way this works is that you need to aim your ad at the right people, those that you've identified as customers, and convey to them the message so that they're picking up that key information. The intent of the ad establishes the tone of your message, what you're offering. Move? Well, that means just triggering their move from being a prospect into taking action and responding to your message. Now that will only happen if you've properly identified who it is that you're chasing after with your ad. which relates to what we've just been talking about. The next thing to do when it comes to the hook or the headline is to make sure that you mention the main benefit of the ad. What you're trying to do here is generate action. You're trying to get these people to move from being prospects to taking action, to do something about the ad. And it's your headline, the hook, that makes this happen. It's what says to the person, hang on, there's something here. Pay more attention. So you've got to make sure that what you do is include your product's strongest benefit. I know I've mentioned this before, but there's a very big difference between benefits and features. Features are a technical thing, and features don't sell products. What you're trying to do in any ad is solve a problem that the person has. Now, a feature won't do that. It's a benefit of a feature that does that. So it's explaining to the prospect how it is that this feature will solve their problem. It's the benefit. So in the hook or the headline, you need to explain the strongest principal benefit to the prospect so that they understand how it's fixing their problem. Sometimes people call this, what's in it for me? So if the prospect doesn't understand what's in it for them, the ad's failed. You've got to get that point across to them. They need to understand what's in it for me. How is it what you're trying to talk to me about is going to solve the problems that I've got? And I realise that must seem very basic, and it is very basic, but it is unbelievable how many times people become sidetracked and don't put that benefit into their advertising. It's one of the principal components of copywriting, which is the art of writing the actual ad, and so many people lose that opportunity. I had a situation recently where a car company that we do advertising for wanted to advertise a new sales rep that had recently joined their company. Now, obviously, this guy had been dealing with people for years. He had a huge list of people that knew him and trusted him. And if they knew where he was, they would at least give him a shot at finding the right car for them, because that's part of what he does. The solution to their problem was that he helped them find the right car. He understood the needs of the individual customer and what sort of car was going to satisfy those needs. I mean, everybody wants a Ferrari, but if you've got 2 kids, it's not a very practical car. So you can't bang a baby seat into the back seat of a Ferrari. Ferraris don't have back seats. Anyway, this guy was very good at solving that particular problem. But when it came time to actually write the ad, he tried to get us to write an ad based on Car of the Week. Now, Car of the Week, once again, is a good technique. It's a great way of saying to people, here's a U-Butte opportunity for you. But the idea of doing an ad with this particular person was to ask, how can this guy solve these people's problems? And they just weren't going to get that across in an ad about Car of the Week. What they needed to get across was this guy understood people's lifestyles. He understood how to find and source cars that might not have even been on his yard to get them into the right sort of car. But they weren't going to mention that in an ad about Car of the Week. All that they were going to mention was, hi, this is blah blah and I've got a great car for you, come and have a chat to me. Now, that ad would have been a dud. It just wouldn't have worked because it didn't answer the basic question of how we solve the customer's problem. Now, in the end, we ended up having an ad that said, this guy is great at solving these problems. He's got a car right now that's designed to solve this particular type of problem. So we incorporated the Car of the Week element in there, but we took the time to explain why it was that he was going to find you the right car and not just try and squeak you into anything that this car yard had on the yard. And the best part is that he was re-establishing that relationship. He would continue to solve the problems of customers going into the future. That's the sort of ad that they actually needed because it solved that question, what's in it for me, for the customer. A lot of people become sidetracked by thinking that they can create a great ad just based on the fact that they're willing to discount their product. Discounting your product is the road to training price buyers. If you just train price buyers, that's the only reason they'll come and see you, because you've established that the discount price is the main benefit of doing business with you. You're in a downward spiral and you haven't even realised it. Invoking dreams and desires is something else that a headline or a hook needs to do. In order for a headline to appeal to an audience, it needs to show them that you have what they want. In other words, what they desire or dream about. And keep in mind, those wanting feelings come from before the need is apparent. So you've got to tap into their desires and convert them to feelings of need by enhancing your product's benefit. Once again, we're back to benefits. It's so much about the benefit to the customer. Provide a solution to a need they have. For example, if we're talking about price buyers, it's about how much money they'll save by dealing with you. And that's why it's the road to ruin, because that's all they're interested in. If there were other reasons, if there are other needs being satisfied, then that's what locks you into a relationship and leaves them with a good feeling that they've been looked after, that they've had an enhanced experience. And by doing that, you're locking them into a relationship. They will come back. Usually, people's buying choices are made according to what they need based on logic or emotion. Now, you've also got to lead your prospective customers through the classic action path. When your reader or listener's attention has been caught by the headline, he or she should be hooked in enough to move on to your sub-headline, your copy's first paragraph. You've drawn them into the ad. You've made them go, okay, tell me more. I'm potentially interested in this point. So first of all, you've got to define the problem or the opportunity. Then you've got to promise the answer or the solution. Now, the promise is very important. Never be afraid to promise anything. Your business delivers on promises every day. You then have to explain the promise or how it will be fulfilled. This is the logic. You've got to show them how it's going to happen so that they embrace it. Then you need to prove that you can do what you're saying you can do. People are very skeptical about advertising. They're so used to people over-promising and under-delivering. So the proof is vital. And finally, in the ad, you need to ask them for an action or a response. You want to ask them to do it. Do it now. Because if you don't ask them, they won't necessarily get off their bum and go and do it. It just becomes one of those things. Ask them, give them the criteria, turn them towards what you want them to do. A word of warning though, you must use question-based headlines with absolute care. Because unless the answer is the only answer you want them to have, you shouldn't ask them a question in a headline. It's the road to danger. If there's more than one answer, then potentially they could write you off. It's the old thing. We've all seen it in court. Never ask a question you don't know the answer to. If you can see more than one possible answer to a question headline, don't ask it. Just move on and come up with a different headline. If you do use a question headline, you've got to make sure that it stirs the curiosity of your prospective customer and it gets an affirmation reply, that it prompts them to continue to read the ad. So while I'm saying being careful, it's a very powerful tool, and that's why you need to be careful with it. So in the words of Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, with great power comes great responsibility. You need to remember that, because that's the power of a question headline. If you're going to use a command headline, you need to be sure that the instructions of the command headline aren't vague. It must be straight to the point. Make your audience do something, and good things will happen to them if they do. But command headlines can elicit negative reactions. And usually you would do that if you're trying to create doubt about something else. And when I say trying to create doubt about something else, I should add a word of warning. Most of you will have competitors. When it comes to your competitors, it can be very tempting to run a negative position against them, say negative things about them. Don't do it. Just ignore them. Pretend that they're not there. If you actually acknowledge the existence, your customers will know that they exist. If your customers know that they exist, then potentially they might shop there as well. They might find out what the choice is. Whether that choice is good or bad doesn't matter. If they go to your opposition, they haven't come to you. So let's just avoid that totally. If you're going to use a headline that's a how-to headline or a how-to hook, the question must be answered in terms of how your product can provide a solution. How-to headlines sound like news headlines. They use words like now and new and announcing and at last. Or if your product is self-help, it might be how, which, wanted, how to. When you use a how-to headline, write it in a way that makes the reader or the listener want to continue with the ad. It's another powerful type of headline, but once again, it's something that you must use with extreme caution. There are many other ways to establish a headline first up. If you're just starting out in advertising, I'd urge you to be a bit more cautious about using that type of headline. When you are establishing a headline, the temptation is to use it across multiple media. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that either. If you're going to try and use a common headline, you've got to modify it to suit the medium that it's going into. And that's why we haven't even spoken about media yet, because the context of your copy will determine what media it gets used in. And therefore, trying to extend the use of a single headline across different types of media can be quite dangerous, especially if it's not implemented the right way. It can have a common theme. That's more important if you're doing advertising in multiple mediums than if you're trying to use the exact same words in exactly the same way across all of the different medium. If you're trying to do that, you're not using the particular strengths of that medium to their best advantage. What you're actually doing is being lazy, so don't do that. If you are doing something of a graphical nature, a television commercial, direct mail, newspaper ad, then it's important that the graphics that you use complement the copy that you're creating. Graphic design is an art. You can't just knock something together, and it really frustrates me when I hear a business owner say, "My cousin or my nephew's a bit clever and I'm going to have him knock something together." And clearly, that's exactly what that nephew or cousin's going to do. He's going to knock something together. If they don't know what they're doing, if they don't understand the principles of trying to market something to another person, then what they're actually doing is creating art. They're trying to make something that's pretty. And making something that's pretty isn't about making the ad work. I agree. Anyone can combine elements on a page and make something that looks like an ad. However, it's not an ad. It's a piece of art. If you're creating something that's designed to induce people to take action, to buy a product, that's what graphic design is about. It's about making those elements work so that you can get a result from that ad. When you do it the other way, once again, you're on the road to wasting money. If you're going to make an ad, get someone who knows what they're doing to do it for you. Quite seriously, it's a bit like saying, "I've never cut hair before, but I've seen it done a few times, so I'm willing to have a crack." I would no more let someone else cut my hair who's not qualified than I would fly to the moon. So don't do it. Really, it's the road to ruin. Let's talk about the length of the headline or the hook. And there's a bit of a formula to this as well. For example, most people have got less than 2 seconds to read a billboard. So that being the case, it shouldn't be any longer than 8 words of text. Otherwise, it's too much for the person's eye to take in, and it won't be doing its job. It's the same thing with headlines and hooks. It cannot be any more than 17 words. 17 words, and no more. In fact, the shorter it is, the better. But 17 words is the absolute maximum. In a 30-second radio ad or television ad, you'll usually only get in about 84 words all up, give or take a few. So 17 words is a large component of the ad, and sometimes you'll need to repeat the hook to get people to fully take it in. Well, if you have to repeat 17 words, nearly half your ad is gone. And in a press ad, 17 words is a lot to get through. Same sort of deal in direct mail. So don't exceed the 17-word barrier when it comes to creating a headline. And if you're not comfortable with a long headline, come up with a short one. Come up with something that's got impact immediately when someone sees it. And then create a 17-word or less convincing subheadline. Remember, the ad is about drawing people into what you want them to do. As a part of that, when we're talking about something that's graphically represented, a headline should be continuous. It shouldn't be broken up or divided by graphics or illustrations or anything that stops your eye from reading it as a single continuous line of text. If you do that, then once again, it's just not going to work. A couple of other things with headlines and hooks. Humour is a very strong tool, but writing humour is a skill. Just because you think something's funny doesn't mean your customer is going to think that it is. Once again, you're consumed by the business. The customer is approaching the business in a very different way. Unless you know how to write comedy, don't write funny stuff, because you run a pretty big risk of alienating people. It's a skill, and it's better left to someone who knows how to write it. You should also avoid headlines that are meaningless or vague and don't actually do anything. They're words that have been joined together that don't convey a strong, pointed or focused message. I'm sure you've all heard of the KISS theory. Keep it simple, stupid. Usually, your headline isn't effective when it's not simple and straightforward. So it's important to keep it focused on just being straightforward and simple. That way, your prospect knows clearly and easily, without lots of thinking, what it is that you're trying to do. If you're trying to intelligently challenge your customer in your headline, you're wasting your money. Just keep the message simple. Once you've got your message, you'll know what media it is that you're going to advertise in, because you've established what your product is, you know who your client is, and you know what your message is going to be. So all of these elements will tell you who you're looking for, what you're trying to tell them, and it tells you where they're going to be in their biggest numbers. You need to reach out with your advertising to the biggest number of people that you possibly can that are in the target group that you're pursuing. Different campaigns will end up in different media, such as direct mail, television, radio, newspaper, online. The list goes on. That's why you go through this process that we've already discussed up to this point, to find out where best to put your money. Now, of course, you've got to budget as well, and that's going to have an effect on where you advertise. There's not much point in creating all of that and saying television if your budget is $200, because clearly you're not going to buy television. That's not a big enough budget. So you've been subverted along the way and need to retrack your steps and go back and look at your message again. Because unless you can find the budget to do television, you just aren't going to do television. You might be able to do a video that you can put on a website, but then you'll also need to know that your website or Facebook page has enough traffic going to it that your message will be effective in that medium. And if you've got a Facebook page that's got 40 fans, that's not enough. Usually, you'd be hoping to make more than 40 sales on most transactions. So, before we get too deep into media, let's talk about the actual buying process. Some of you may know this, others may not know it, so I'll run through it because it's genuinely important. I mentioned before that McDonald's has a very short 10-second buying cycle. Other buying cycles, for example cars, are often around 12 weeks long. There's a process that the consumer goes through that leads them actually to walking into your store to buy something. Because remember, it's a funnel. I think a funnel is the easiest way to describe it. Lots of stuff gets tipped into the top, and lots of people start the process and are interested in what's going on. But as you get towards the point where they're actually going to part with the cash, hits the narrow end of the funnel. So only a smaller amount actually come through and hand over the money. There's an acronym that outlines this process, which is called AIDA, A-I-D-A. It's very simple and was actually devised quite a long time ago, 1925 in fact. And while it's quite a simple model, it really does still hold true today. I've seen some modifications to it over the years, but in its basic form, AIDA stands for attention or awareness, some people like to call it awareness, interest, desire, and action. Now let's run through each of those. Awareness or attention, depending on what you like to call it. First of all, you've got to get the attention of your customer, because if they're not aware of your product, or that your product even exists, you can hardly persuade them to do anything. There's a number of ways that you can get their attention, short of running down the street with no clothes on. That's not the difficult point, but you must make them aware that you exist. Without the knowledge that you exist, they won't move into your buying cycle. If they're not aware of who you are, then chances are they're not entering your buying cycle at all. Interest. Interest is the intellectual justification of knowledge of your product. To make a buying decision, people need to intellectually justify to themselves why they're making this decision. So this is all non-emotional. These are just the facts, Jack. Just give me the facts. And this is where the features and benefits of the products really start to take effect. So intellectually, you're telling them about the features of your product, but it's the benefits that are actually selling at this stage, because that links into the next section of the buying cycle. But you can get people's interest by reflecting their problems back to them. So they say, my problem is XYZ. And you answer by saying, if your problem is XYZ, then here's how this problem will solve your problem. You can talk to them about how things that are influencing their problem are answered by your product. You can demonstrate how their problems are or can be fixed by this product. It's the beginning of the active involvement with your product. This is what interest is all about. It's what you're trying to solve with these facts. However, in this part of the buying cycle, you have to be careful of the boredom factor, because people's eyes will start to glaze over. You just need only to justify what's going on here to a certain extent. It's not about bombarding them with facts. Just establish the idea that their problems can be sorted out by your product. The next step is desire. And this is where the benefits really start to kick in, because it's all about the emotional side of making the purchase. Desire is a motivation to act, and it leads the customer towards the next stage of the buying cycle. Desire is a bit like a fire that you stoke, and there are many methods. You show them how the item that they desire will solve their problems. However, it's not available forever. Scarcity is very important when it comes to advertising. If someone thinks that there are lots of something, then what's their motivation to hurry up and buy it? The less of something there is, the more important it is that they act on it pretty quickly. From a desire point of view, it's important to demonstrate how other people approve of the product and how it's given them satisfaction. Principally, it's about showing them the mirror, so that they look into it and see themselves and understand how their problems are going to be solved. By solving those problems, emotionally, they'll be satisfied. They've removed this problem from their life. So you're trying to satisfy these deep emotional needs that people have. Even if we're talking about food. Food is a deep and emotional need. And if you've ever been hungry, you'll know how important it is to satisfy that need. So desire is very important. The last step in the buying cycle is action. This is the money stage. It's actually getting them to do what you want them to do so that they're at the thin end of the funnel. Show me the money. Give me the dollars now. You've actually got to ask for it. If you don't ask, they won't necessarily have to do it. If you're not telling them what you want them to do, how will they know what they've got to do next? And this is where you get the old, oh, I'm going to think about it stage, because you haven't successfully told them what you want them to do, and what you want them to do is complete the transaction. They're asking you, can you deliver on what you're saying? And you're answering, yes, I can. Here's the reason, here's the solution, do it now. It needs to summarize the intellectual and the emotional solutions to their problem and say, do it now. So that's the buying cycle: awareness, interest, desire, and action. That's what you're trying to move the customer through when you're trying to get them to buy something.